Hello there and welcome back to my channel, or if this is the first video of mine you are seeing, then welcome. Okay, I got this palette on Valentine's Day, and when I tell you that I have instantly I love it. I want to use it all the time now, and I have never used any eyeshadow from this brand before. This is NYX Cosmetics. This is their Ultimate Warm Neutrals eyeshadow palette, and it looks like this. Of course, I'm sure most of you have seen this. Now, I believe this color story has existed before in their line, but they recently redid the packaging and everything. I want to say last year, but I got this palette on Valentine's Day. I have already reached for it. I'm filming this on the Monday after Valentine's Day. That was Friday. So I've used it already 3 different times. And I don't normally wear eyeshadow on the weekend. Sometimes I do on Saturdays, sometimes I don't. But usually I've been doing like my No Pen Left Behind palettes on the weekend so I could do multiple looks. No, when I tell you that all I wanted to do was reach for this is a beautiful eyeshadow palette, so we're going to create 2 looks with it right here. So let me zoom you in and let's get started. Okay, I have never used NYX eyeshadows before. I don't know, I guess I just don't think of this brand when I think of eyeshadow. I think more so of like lip products or even complexion products. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this shade right here on a blending brush from e.l.f. Okay, and we're just going to use that shade to set my eyeshadow primer. I have gone ahead and used my Milani eyeshadow primer, and I just want to use this shade to kind of set that down. And the only other things I've done off camera is I went ahead and used my face primer and all that. Everything will be listed for you below, because this is mostly going to be focusing on this eyeshadow palette. But I want to do 2 different eye looks with it. But I have done 2 looks with this over the weekend, and I'll pop up some pictures for you on the screen so you can see the 2 eye looks that I've created so far. I mean, I know I've already spoiled everything, but I mean, I'm so impressed with this eyeshadow palette. And I'm going to be so honest here. I normally don't favor drugstore eyeshadow over high-end. Like, I don't mean that in a bad way. There are good palettes from the drugstore. I certainly don't mean it like that. I just mean that my favorites tend to be high-end, like Natasha Denona or something like that, or like Makeup by Mario or a palette like that. That's usually the eyeshadow palettes that I would reach for. Of course, now I really do like the Beauty Bay palette, the neutral palette, the 42 pan. I do like that as well, so that's kind of a little bit more of an affordable price point. But just in general, I usually would reach for high-end eyeshadow over drugstore, but I mean, this palette, I have been so impressed by it, and I just want to create some looks with it because I just want to. I'm just not ready to put this palette down right now. Okay, on a Sigma E24, we're going to take this shade right here, and we're going to run that right into the crease. I just feel like if you want a very simple palette. Now this palette, okay, it is drugstore, but it is a $20 eyeshadow palette. I just want to point that out. However, I feel like the quality is amazing. I have not struggled with any eye look that I've created so far with this eyeshadow palette. I have enjoyed every single look, and I haven't even been reaching much for warm tones lately. I've been reaching more for like the cooler tones and the pinky tones. When I tell you this palette, yes, it's warm leaning, but it is so beautiful. I have just wanted to continuously reach for this palette. So that's why I wanted to create 2 eye looks with it. I also, over the weekend, I did use one of the shades for my brows as well. Now, it is a little bit too warm for my brows. My brows are more of like a cooler tone brown, but you couldn't really tell from far off. Now, you'd have to be really close to tell that it was too warm. But just so, it was perfect. And I even took a smaller face brush that I had, and I went in with a shade in this palette for a bronzer and a blush. Now you do have to use a small brush, of course, because these pans are small and they're not like magnetic or anything, so you can't pop them out. But honestly, I thought that they looked really beautiful. I even used, oh, I forgot, I did use one of the shades for a highlighter as well. And see, this is something else that I look for in a favorite eyeshadow palette. Can I use it for multiple things? Because sometimes I like doing that. My most favorite palette, the I Need a Nude from Natasha Denona, I use that palette a lot for blush, for highlighter. Well, not so much highlighter, I should say, because I'm not a highlighter person, but I have used it for that. And bronzer. And I've also used a shade in there for my brows, like doing a full face with just that eyeshadow palette. And that's kind of what I look for in palettes like this. If they cost a little bit more, now this one is of course not on the same price range as a Natasha Denona, but it is $20, which is still a little bit more for the drugstore. But if I can multitask with it, then you definitely can get your money's worth out of it. I mean, just so beautiful. Okay, on that same brush, I'm going to go into this shade right here. Okay, this shade has some shimmer into it, but it's kind of like a skin tone shade, but there is some sparkle in it. So what I'm going to do is just kind of lightly place this all over the lid, and it's going to kind of work as another base shade, but just with some sparkle. Because it has some really pretty, very, very light sparkle, mind you. Because I will say that these shades in here are more of like satin shades. They're not so much like the really intense sparkly shades. So if you are into those, then you probably won't like this palette, because this is definitely more of the subtle. This shade has some sparkle in it, but it's very, very fine. Of course, I'll say this palette is really probably only going to be for someone who loves really soft neutral looks anyway, of course, because it is a neutral palette. But I know some neutral palettes can have really impactful shimmers. This is definitely not one of them. These shimmers are very soft and very smooth, and they're more of like the satin. This one has tiny flecks, but they're very, very fine. On a Sigma E57, I'm going in with this shade right here. Now this is more of like a satin shade, but when I tell you these satin shades are so beautiful and smooth. And we're going to place that right out here. And we'll keep most of that pigment right here at the lash line, and then I'm going to go in a few seconds and wipe my brush off on my little silicone mat, and then work that shade a little bit more up. I don't want too much pigment to go up into the crease, because I kind of want to make sure it's easier to blend out. So now that that brush is wiped off, now we're going to drag that shade up this way. Alright, we're going to do the same thing over here. Get most of that pigment down right in here where the lash line is, and then work my way up. On that same brush, we're going to take this shade right here, and we're going to place that shade right here in the very center of my lid. See, I mean, you can see just how smooth they are. These are definitely more of like these satin shades, which I don't mind. But if you really like sparkle, then you probably won't like this palette. I mean, I'm just so impressed by this eyeshadow palette. Like, I just can't get over it. I really can't. Now, don't get me wrong. As far as like drugstore eyeshadow goes, I really like the ColourPop palettes and e.l.f.'s, like the Perfect 10 eyeshadow palettes they have. Their 4-pan palettes are good too, but the 10, I think they call them Perfect 10, those are good. But I've never had one be on what I'd call favorite status. Except for, there is some from ColourPop, but not on the same level as my Natasha Denona, is what I'm kind of trying to say here. Like, that's my #1 palette. So for a palette to come along like this one and kind of rival that palette, not beat it, but rival it, hey, I'm impressed. Alright, same brush, this shade right here. And this I'm going to pop right here on this innermost part of my lid, just for that a little bit of brightness. Now, of course, I am going to pop something on the inner corner too, but I want to do like my concealer and stuff first. Okay, we are going to go into like my under eye corrector and concealer. I'm going to use my NYX Pro Fix Stick Correcting Concealer, and this one's in the shade Fair. Okay, and then I'm going to take my NYX Bear With Me Concealer Serum, and this one is in the shade Light. Take a little bit, my finger, and then do this, and then start placing that down. Okay, and then I'm going to go back into this shade right here, and I'm going to run that all along my lower lash line. Then I'm going to take this shade right here, and we're going to pop that right in here in this inner corner, just for a little pop of brightness. Okay, and then I'm going to take this shade right here on a small angled brush from e.l.f. And I'm going to use that to line my lash line right quick. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go ahead and apply my mascara and foundation off camera. And then I'll be right back to show you this palette used as bronzer, highlighter, and blush. Okay, have you zoomed back out? I did end up using that NYX Bear With Me Serum Concealer as foundation. And then on the lips, I'm wearing the NYX, what is this? The Fat Oil Lip Drip. Is that what they're called? In the shade Follow Back. That's all I'm wearing. I'm not wearing a lip line or anything. I'm just wearing this one. I thought this pretty warmth would be really pretty with the eye look. So I did also use this shade right here. Well, if I can get the palette without dropping it. I used this shade right here for my brows. So like I said, from far off you can't tell, but it is a little bit too warm for my brows, but it's not that noticeable. So now I'm going to use this palette for bronzer, blush, and highlighter. But these pans are really small, so I have this brush right here. This brush has sadly been discontinued, but if you have any small brush like this, that will do. This is the e.l.f. 105 brush. They discontinued this brush a long time ago for some reason. So I'm going to first go into this shade right here from the palette, and I'm just going to pick up a good amount of that on this brush. I'm just kind of taking it and just working the brush really slowly into that shade. Now, mind you, I know that this is probably just not the greatest thing, but look how pretty. I know, of course, that you can have your own bronzer, your own blush and highlighter, but I like to see if I can multitask with eyeshadow palettes. And I love that I absolutely can. Because you can see, look how pretty and subtle that shade is as bronzer. Now, yesterday, when I used this palette for bronzer, I used this shade over here. But actually, I think this shade works better, but this one worked too. So that's just an option. I don't know, I just really like to see palettes being used in multiple ways, especially palettes that are a little bit more pricey. Because, I mean, you know that this is a $20 palette, which for the drugstore, that's a little bit more because the e.l.f. 10-pan palettes are $10. And then ColourPop, I know their palettes kind of range in price too, so I guess NYX is kind of on par with like maybe what ColourPop is charging. But I mean, either way, the quality is amazing on this palette, and I love using that shade as bronzer. Yeah, I like that shade better than I did the one that I used yesterday. Now, the other one worked. It absolutely did, but I feel like this one is like an even prettier tone for this. Ooh, I really like that. I love to do this with my I Need a Nude palette as well, and that's why I wanted to see if I could do it with this one too, and you absolutely can. Okay, I'm going to wipe that brush off on my little silicone mat because we're going to have to use the same brush for all of the face steps. So now I'm going to take this shade right here, and I'm going to do it the exact same way. We're going to run that brush all along into that shade. I'm not even a big highlighter person, but you can see that's so pretty. You know what? I'm going to call it right now. I can see this being my most used palette of the year. I can see it right now. I mean, I don't know. Something else might come along. I'm aware of that. Something might come along, but right now, this is such a beautiful palette. Okay, we're going to go into this shade right here. Then I kind of like to keep taking this and rubbing it onto my hand a little bit to kind of work some of that powder into the brush. So it's not too... I mean, I'm just so impressed. Look how pretty. And it matches the eye look. Stunning. Now this shade is incredibly pigmented, so I have to be very careful with this one. But if you are, look how beautiful. It just turns into the most beautiful blush. Well, here. And we're just going to take whatever's left, which isn't much, and we're just going to run it right in here. Kind of looks like a little bit of a sunburny blush kind of thing. I mean, come on. This is so pretty, this palette. I am so impressed by this palette. Okay, so here is this final look. Using this palette all over my face is bronzer, blush, highlighter, eyeshadow, and a brow product, and I have to say I'm impressed, but we got one more look to do. So for look number 2, I want to do an all matte eye look. I have some quite important errands that I have to run today, so it's not wise for me to be wearing a lot of eyeshadow today. I just need to keep it kind of very simple. So let me zoom you in. So I am going to go into this shade right here on a blending brush from e.l.f. And this is just a shade that I use to set my eyeshadow primer. I'm just using the Milani eyeshadow primer today. I'm using the same makeup that I did yesterday. The only thing I'm changing up is the mascara, but all of that will be listed below, like I said. I really want to do a brown smoky eye with this palette because I feel like you could really create a gorgeous look like that with this palette, but today is just not the best day to be doing something like that because I can't have really... Not that a smoky eye is over the top, but for what I'm doing today, it would be. So I can't do anything like that. And I want this video to go up this coming Wednesday, so I don't believe I'd have time to film another look. But I can always do something like that in the future, of course, like have a separate video for a brown smoky eye. On a Sigma E24, I'm going to take this shade right here, and I'm going to run that into my crease. Did all of you see where that... Okay, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. The Aspen Ovard, I believe is how you say her name. That palette from Tarte is coming back, or they brought it back, I should say. Now, when I got into the beauty stuff, like social media and everything, that palette had already made its way out, but it was one of those palettes that I feel like everybody talked about it, how it was so beautiful. It was one of the best palettes. They were angry that Tarte got rid of it. So when I saw that it come back, I did buy it. It is on its way to me right now. I know I don't need another eyeshadow palette, but this is one of those palettes that I need to know for myself if it's really that great, because I heard so much about it. I know a bunch of people even had it placed into like a makeup, like a memory box or something, because they didn't really want to continue using it because they didn't want to like not have it anymore, and it does have really pretty packaging. But I did purchase it, and I will be doing a review on my channel. I'm just curious, is this palette really worth all that or not? Because, I mean, I just felt like when I first kind of started watching beauty YouTube, I'd hear about that palette non-stop. And you'd see it in people's eyeshadow collections and stuff, so I just gotta know. I have to know. So I did purchase it, and I will be reviewing it. We'll be doing swatches and everything. But back to this palette is incredible. Like Tarte who? With this palette, Tarte who? I'm going to build that shade up a little bit more on this side because I feel like I applied a little bit more over here. But I will say that I was just talking, I was kind of on autopilot over here, so I might have just blended too much away. because I tend to do that. I'll just start talking and then I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing. Okay, using that same brush, I'm going into this shade right here. And if this shade isn't deep enough for what I'm about to do, I can always go in with another shade, but I want to start with this because, like I said, I'm trying to keep this soft and I want an all matte eye look. So we're going to start stamping that on this outer half of my lid. Not to mention, there's something so beautiful and classy about an all matte eye like this, like with these types of palettes. Like an all matte neutral eye. That's just so beautiful and just timeless to me. Honestly, yeah, I think that's about as much depth as I want today, but you can totally go in with some of those deeper shades, of course, and deepen it up even further. But I think this is a perfect stopping point for me and what I'm looking for. I mean, I love this palette so much. I just want to use it every day. Yeah, that's just perfect right there. That's all I need. Is just that little bit. I am going to apply a little bit more right there at the lash line. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Just keeping this nice and soft. Do you know how many times I've been tempted to buy that new little 5-pan palette from Natasha Denona, one of her little mini palettes, the one that's the all matte? Why? I mean, I understand that palettes like that are really good staples in collections. Like, I think that it's nice to have the option, but I mean, I have plenty of beautiful palettes like this one that can give me an all matte eye look. The only thing that that palette has that this one don't is I believe that palette has a black, but I don't use black eyeshadow that often. And if I do use it, I'm using it mostly as liner. I'm not really adding it to like my actual, you know, like lid, like where I'm applying this shade. I don't really, you know. I'd mostly rather work with a brown shade on this outer corner or outer half. Same brush, we're going to take this shade right here. And I'm just keeping this more fluffier brush because I just want, you know, a little bit more of a softer application. See, like that, I love just that soft kind of cream color. See, something like that could be my everyday eye look and I would never get tired of it. Never. Because I just think it's so pretty and so classy. Yeah, that is perfect. I love that so much. Okay, so I'm just going to apply my NYX Pro Fix Stick Correcting Concealer and then my NYX Bear With Me Concealer Serum over the top of that. Okay, I'm going to go into this shade right here on a small angled brush from e.l.f. And I'm going to run that all the way across my lower lash line. Okay, then I'm going to go back into this shade right here on that same brush. And we're going to pop that right in here for just a little bit of extra brightness. Just a little bit. Okay, and then I am going to take this shade right here and line my lash line with that. So I'm going to do that right quick, and I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of my face. I am going to also be using this palette for my face steps as well, but since I showed that yesterday, and I will have timestamps for you below so you can kind of pick and choose what you want to see, I'm not going to film that part today, so I'm going to do the rest of my face and I'll be right back. I did the same thing for my face that I did yesterday. I am wearing this shade right here as bronzer, this shade right here as highlighter, and is it this shade? Yes. And this shade right here as blush. And then on the lips, I'm wearing the same NYX lip oil in the shade Follow Back. I'm just keeping it very simple using the same stuff that I did yesterday to create this look. And I mean, okay. This eyeshadow palette, I love this eyeshadow palette. And the fact that I can multitask with it as well, I'm wearing it as bronzer, blush, highlighter, and in my brows and on the eyes. I love eyeshadow palettes that I can do that with because I just feel like that makes them even more versatile. And if they're a little bit more on the pricier side, which I mean, I guess $20 now is probably going to be more normal for the drugstore, but you know what I mean. There are some palettes at the drugstore that are like $10 and less. So this one is $20, or it's like 19 something, but might as well say $20. But I feel like knowing that I can wear it like this, You can really get your money's worth out of it. This is a beautiful color story that I know I'm going to be using all the time. I have loved every single makeup look I have created with this eyeshadow palette. Every single one. I definitely want to reach for it again to do more of a brown smoky eye. I would love to do more with like the more red tones in the eyeshadow palette. I did do a look like that over the weekend when I wore this palette just on my own time, which I did insert a picture of that earlier, but those shades perform really beautifully too. This is a gorgeous eyeshadow palette. Honestly, if it was one you were considering, you were looking at this one and you were thinking, do I want that or not? I personally don't think you'd be disappointed with it if you decide to pick it up, because I have just loved every single look I've created with it. It is a beautiful eyeshadow palette. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, I hope you will please consider leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing if you haven't already. All of these products will be listed and linked for you below. They are affiliate links, so if you click through and purchase, I do earn a small commission, and if you choose to do so, thank you so much for supporting me and my channel, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!